I raised my son in church. I was always there for him, and now he won't take my calls or return my texts. I don't understand what I did wrong.
What does respect actually mean? Because some people, they don't really know what that means. You don't respect me if you don't do what I say. You don't respect me if you don't still let me control your life to a certain extent. So I think you've got to figure out the definition of respect.
They feel that when the child leaves the home, they still owe a certain level of education, correspondence, submission, and all about, yes, there should always be a certain level of respect. But you do not have, in my opinion, the right to control your adult children, especially when they're out from under your roof, they're earning their own living, there are no financial strings. You do not have the authority, in my opinion, to try to dictate their choices.
A kid can live states or hours away or minutes, but you still be connected to them emotionally. But if that emotional connection is gone, then it's like, then everything's just superficial.
If you do not like the functional or transactional situation that you yourself has created, it's not the kid's fault.
Welcome back.
To what?
To Beyond the Nest with Lance and Allie Swan Princess.
Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. We're going to talk about something fun today. Well, I don't know, maybe not fun.
Wow.
A little heartbreaking.
It is. And you find it fun.
No, I meant
that's a way to start this one.
Passionate about it because so many people that we see or that comment on our content are dealing with estrangement from their children. And so it's a little bit of a passion of ours to kind of like dig into stuff and find out why, what's gone wrong, because you can't fix something if you don't know what went wrong. Like if you don't know there's a problem, you don't know to fix it. Right. And so, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the heartbreak of it.
The whole purpose behind what we get to do with Beyond the Nest is it's definitely not to make people think we have all the answers.
Oh, heavens no.
That we've done everything.
I have the answers, but
I don't always listen.
No,
I know.
That's right. No, I'm joking.
But if we're able to equip people to manage their own expectations about empty nest, about marriage, about relationship with children, if we can do anything to help equip people with a tool or a resource to strengthen relationships, that is a passion. And it's, when you walk through certain things, you have a different level of voice and credibility to talk about it, and you have authority. And, for whatever reason, this thing from Peter Parker, the movie,
from Spider-Man?
Yes. With great power comes great responsibility.
Okay.
And when we have walked through something, we do have a different level of authority, a different level of power. And it hopefully allows us to, one, give hope to some other empty nest parents, to give some tools and maybe resources. And so the topic, like you said, is estrangement. And that came about, honestly, for me, on all of the multiple comments on the different reels or the podcast of these parents that have little to no relationship with their son or their daughter. And it is heartbreaking. And I think a big part of it is, where do we start?
Yeah.
And where do we look? It's like if we are constantly looking at this is someone else's fault, the likelihood of reconciliation happening is greatly diminished. I've told people before, if I don't care who gets the credit, reconciliation is really likely to happen.
Well, and what's interesting is I think everybody thinks, estrangement. Well, it's just estrangement. But that's not always the case, because you found that there are multiple kinds of estrangement.
Yeah.
Am I right? Read them.
Can I read them out? So there's probably even more than what I have on my list. But the types of estrangement, and we may not hit all of them, but this is at least something that's going to get us having some great conversations. If anyone has questions on some of them that we either cover or don't cover, throw it in the comments and we'll do our best to get back. But you ready for the list?
Yeah.
Number one, physical physical estrangement. That is oftentimes it's geographic related. It's maybe the child has just simply moved out of the house, maybe to another state, and there's really no relational problem. But when there's a physical estrangement, they're just not as accessible.
Well, yeah, you can't put your hands on your child or see, like, I feel like there's times I just need to like look my child in the eye, and you can't do that if they're living like states away from you.
Number 2, emotional estrangement. What could you do in like 5 seconds to say what that is? Because we'll come back to it.
Well, emotional estrangement is just like you have no emotional connection. It's super surface level.
Totally disconnected.
Yeah.
Number 3, selective contact. This is where the child has put limitations on, I will be available for holidays or birthdays, but outside of that, I'm living my own life. That could be hurtful.
Ouch.
Right?
Yeah.
Number 4, role reversal. That is where the adult child now feels like they're having to parent their parent.
Or they've been having to parent the parent. Like if you've got a super immature parent, I could see where that would be difficult.
And I have some acquaintances that it's not just about the immature parent, but the adult child is having to parent their parent because their parent is an addict of some sort.
Oh yeah.
And they feel like an obligation to, and I also know some that they are so fed up with their parent by being that addict.
They're done.
They're done. They just walked away. So role reversal, that's a big level of estrangement. Ideological. That is where there is a difference of opinion from the adult child and the parent, either from a religious perspective, a political stance, which our country,
the last 5 years have really ripped that one wide open.
And we know families personally.
Yeah.
And we get those on comments as well.
And that's something that, I think there's a lot of judgment that comes with that one. Like a lot of, will you believe this, or you voted for this person, or I don't feel safe because your ideological view on this issue makes me feel unsafe. And there's not a lot of holding space for somebody if that's where you're at,
This next one's definitely the heavy. I think the heaviest of the group, and it's trauma-based. It is where there's been some type of an abuse, physical, verbal, sexual.
Big T trauma.
Big T.
Yeah.
Big T trauma.
Where you have to draw the boundary.
If the child feels or knows that they were abused in any of those categories as a child, when they finally get out on their own,
they're gone.
They're gone. And that is where therapy and counseling is probably going to be one of those things that have to come into play, and probably on both parties. That one is so deep.
Have you noticed, and this has come up in, I don't know if it's just algorithms, but I've noticed like in my social media feed, there's been more and more stories or reels about how the increase of therapy, and we're pretty big proponents of therapy, but have you been reading things about how people are saying the increased use of therapy has caused more estrangement?
Yes, I have read that.
That would be an interesting topic to talk about at some point.
All right, let's let me make a note of that.
Yeah.
We'll come back to it because I've read it and watched some of and it makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, obviously, yes, we're a proponent of therapy.
But I think you have to be choosy about who you use in therapy, because not everybody has pure motives.
Okay, so that was trauma. Number 7, passive or ghost estrangement. What do you think that is?
I think people just disappear. Like,
Yep. First thing for me is passive aggressive. tendencies.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
When you think about passive aggressive tendencies, it's like, I am going to put you in your place by not responding to your call.
Yeah. Or people who don't love conflict. I could see how people who hate conflict, who can't deal with conflict, just kind of disappear and they fall off the face of the earth with their parent.
Number 8, by proxy. What does that mean, do you think?
Well, maybe a spouse has pulled them away, or
you see this a lot.
Divorce.
You see this a lot in divorce scenarios where either custody issues, or you have somebody in the family is pulling or creating a mindset in this young adult that this other person is evil, wrong, out to get whatever it is. So by proxy, you have someone else that's feeding into the scenario and creating division or estrangement.
Yeah.
Situational. I see this one a lot. It's some type of a betrayal that the adult child is now feeling because, and the one that immediately comes to mind, and we see this so many times, the adult parents don't approve of the mate that their child chose. And because they don't approve of that scenario, it is a situational deal. We've even seen emails or comments that some of these parents have not only did not have a relationship with their daughter or their son because of the spouse, they've actually chosen not to have a relationship with their grandkids over that. Now, we're not talking about a physical abuse scenario. We're talking preferences.
Right.
I don't approve of this person because ethnicity, religious beliefs, a lot of them, I see this too. They feel that, I see it more on the daughter with the husband than anything else. They feel that this new husband has pulled their daughter away from the parents. They don't listen. The daughter doesn't listen to the parents anymore.
They can't control the daughter.
They can't control the daughter. It's a belief system that I brought you into this world. You should always honor and respect regardless of your age. And now that you have a new person into the family, it's biblically perspective, they've left. They've left and they've started their own family.
And to be fair, like you said, we're talking about preferences. We're talking about run-of-the-mill, normal situations. We're not talking about an abusive, narcissistic husband who swoops in and takes the daughter away. That's a completely different situation.
Okay, this final one. Unfortunately, I see this a lot in the work that I get to do with coaching and working with business owners, and it's functional or transactional. You have, in a lot of scenarios, dealing with families that have financial means, you see these children that are estranged until they what?
Until they need them.
Until they need something. And a lot of times it's from a financial perspective.
Like a trust fund kid, maybe, or...
Well, not even that. It's, yes, that's one of the examples. But like this week, I got to visit with a bunch of business owners specifically about creating intentional legacy. And several of the owners had children that work for them in the business. And where some folks that own a business, they allow the children to come in and they start at ground level. They earn their way up. They learn to appreciate what they have. Others, they brought the child in and gave them a corner office, massive salary. They didn't earn it. They just had the right last name. And you have these families that now are these owners, a couple of them that were there. And, my directness, I said, don't want to be too direct, but I said, you will always get what you tolerate. One of them seemed to accept it, and the other one kind of got a little defensive. But it's, if you do not like the functional or transactional situation that you yourself has created, it's not the kid's fault.
Yeah.
The kid's going to do what they can get away with. And you, as the patriarch, matriarch, you're going to continue to get what you tolerate. So there's a lot in those 10.
Yeah.
I want to come back to a story that one of the stories we got in some comments. You okay with that?
Yeah.
This was a mom that put a comment in. Said, I raised my son in church. I was always there for him. And now he won't take my calls or return my texts. I don't understand what I did wrong.
That's a classic example of the ghosting one, don't you think?
Yeah, it's a good fit.
Because she doesn't know. It sounds like she wants to know what happened. He won't return calls. So there can be no dialogue in figuring out, like, let's sit down and talk about this because he won't return calls.
Yeah.
And so.
And if you were the mom sitting here across from me, first of all, I'd make sure you're in the room, right? We'd always do that. I would first apologize that you feel this pain, this hurt, because it does break your heart, my heart, that somebody that wants to have a relationship with their child isn't able to have that relationship right now for whatever reason. Now, what we don't know is how is she going about trying to make contact?
Right.
There's going to be multiple sides to this, and every scenario is going to be uniquely different.
Yeah.
But one thing that I notice in this is just in the verbiage, again, it's very superficial what I'm getting ready to say, but how many times did she use the word I? I did this, I did this, I did this.
Yeah.
The focus is clearly on her.
Yes.
And what if there's something that we need to look at on behalf of the child? So there could be.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I would say there's always something to look at on either end of the spectrum. But in defense of the mom, yes, we do tend to make it all about us. I get that as moms sometimes. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn. But I also think if you are a grown man, have the kahunas enough to at least have a conversation with your mom, because I feel like, yes, it is, as a parent, we're always going to be the parents. We have more experience than our children do. I don't care how old they are. We're always going to be however many years older than they are, always. So we have more life experience. We have more maturity. But if you're an adult child, there's a little bit of responsibility on your part also to at least have a conversation. What we don't know is, was there any abuse? Was there were there narcissistic tendencies? Like, is this mother self-aware? Yes, we don't know all those things, but in order to bridge the gap, you have to have a conversation, So what is it about the son that if the mom's going like, I don't understand what I did wrong, that he won't even have that conversation? So,
okay.
Yeah.
A slightly different perspective.
Yeah.
Your focus was the son needs to have the quiet to make it. I get that, but what if
only to balance the whole thing out, Yeah.
What if there are a tremendous amount of strings attached, right? She's made it very clear she loves her son.
Sure.
But what if this love has come attached with guilt, manipulation, withholding favor, whatever it might be? What if the way the mom, or it could be a dad, right? I don't know their story, and that's what makes it a little bit of a challenge. But
yeah.
I do know that the harder we made attempts to connect with our boys, they had a tendency to almost pull back away.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them even told you at one point, Mom, you're being a little thirsty. Do you remember that?
Oh, I do.
And that was hurtful at the time.
Well, I was like, thirsty? I'm not thirsty. I had my water for the day.
So
like, I didn't even know. So the whole gap
language
of,
gap.
yeah,
so what
yeah,
do
yeah.
you mean by that then?
Like I was too much. I was needing too much attention from them. Yeah. Yeah.
And he was a grown-ass man out doing his own
know.
thing. He was doing what we had equipped him to do.
But he told me what he needed to tell me.
Right. And that was, I think, a big part of it is we push those communication barriers.
Yeah.
Early and often. But I just look at it from, if there are strings attached to your love,
Yeah.
I'm not doubting the level of love at all.
I know.
What I'm questioning is there control, fear, guilt, manipulation,
Unhealed wounds.
Yes.
I mean, because sometimes love isn't always enough. Sometimes there are things that take us deeper. If we're willing to go, we have to deal with our stuff. So yeah, I get that. But like I said, there's always two sides to a story. I think it's unfair to place, and I would place most of the responsibility on me as a mom because of what I said earlier. But I think that in the process of reconciling, trying to regain some sort of relationship, you can't just bury the child's responsibility to, stand up and be a man. You can communicate in a kind way, just like, my boys told me I was too thirsty. At least they said something that made me stop and go, okay, wait a minute. What does this mean? What do you mean by this? And we talk a ton about communication, and it's easier said than done, because it sounds like this mom is trying to communicate, but it's not being reciprocated. So you can't fix a problem that is
again,
one-sided.
I go back to all the many comments. There seems to be a pattern that the parents are feeling estranged because they're reaching out, trying to communicate like this, and the children they're just not responding. But then when you look at obviously there's no comment on age, but you get all these other patterns. Is these children are saying their moms or their dads they're manipulative. So that's why I was looking at it from a perspective of there's always going to be two sides.
Yeah.
What do you think we go back through some of these types of estrangements?
Yeah.
And I'm going to read all 10. Tell me which one you want to tackle. We're not going to dig into the meanings of them. So we have physical, emotional, selective, role reversal, ideological, trauma, passive, proxy, situational, which I do think we should hit that at some point because we see that a lot, and transactional. Which one do you want to tackle right now?
Let's just do the situational, because that seemed to be one that you were interested in.
Well, I think it's the one that creates the most hurt.
Oh, really? The most hurt?
Because we have so many people that the parents don't approve of their spouse. Mm-hmm. And you've talked many times, you do not want to be the monster-in-law.
No.
And that episode got a lot of response from moms. Even some of them like, man, I wish I had you as a mother-in-law. But you're an amazing mother-in-law. Your daughter-in-laws, they absolutely love you. And that's a testament to it being intentional and being available without domineering, right? So, but the situational, if you're let's look at it from maybe two perspectives. Let's first look at it from empty nest. You don't approve of your son-in-law or daughter-in-law. We're not talking abuse situations.
We're talking just basic run-of-the-mill. They're not my favorite.
Whether it's political, religious.
Ooh, now you're getting into a different one. You're getting into the ideological.
Well, that is, but okay. We'll come back to the ideological.
It's like, are we going to bleed over into another one, or?
Well, the situational is the parents don't approve of their son-in-law or daughter-in-law because of something that they're not a fan of or in agreement with. And
well, here's a perfect scenario. Say the parent has a daughter, and this daughter is just the apple of their eye, and they've grown up just a middle class to upper class, situation. And the daughter falls in love, just madly in love, and just chooses to marry this man who financially maybe didn't come from the same class, or because, I think there are situations where you have a child who marries a young man who they don't feel like can give their daughter the life that she deserves. And so that could be a scenario. That could be a preference. Your preference is, you're not going to be able to drive the amount of income that we have provided for her. That's a scenario.
Okay.
Maybe you've got a different race, because some people, despite that it's 2025 and we all are people, some people would say no if my child is going to marry somebody of a different race. You know, that could be a scenario. There's so many different. What if you've got two families who they meet and the parents don't get along and there's this giant rift because parents can't get out of the way, you know?
I think that's a big part of it, is whether the parents are willing to get out of the way.
Right.
We have had some positive comments, but we've also had some very aggressive comments when we've had on different episodes and talked about when the children leave the home, you've relinquished control. And we've got some strong-willed parents, empty nest parents, that don't agree with that. They feel that when the child leaves the home, they still owe a certain level of communication, correspondence, submission. I'm all about, yes, there should always be a certain level of respect. But you do not have, in my opinion, the right to control your adult children, especially when they're out from under your roof, they're earning their own living, there are no financial strings. You do not have the authority, in my opinion,
right,
to try to dictate their choices.
Well, and I think that comes into then what is your view of what does respect actually mean? Because some people, they don't really know what that means, because respect, everything is lumped into respect. You know, you don't respect me if you don't do what I say. You don't respect me if you don't still let me control your life to a certain extent. So I think you got to figure out, you know, the definition of respect. You need to be able to read and find a dictionary and see, because the Bible even talks about, you know, respecting your parents, honoring your parents. But it does not mean, even when you look biblically, like, families might have lived together, but people were able to still make decisions. They usually made them on what was best for the family. That was a different time. I get that. But I don't believe that I'm disrespected if my children plow their own path in life, you know? So yeah, I think there's also, I think a grown parent who's feeling disrespected by a child like that needs to roll back the hands of time and remember what it was like when they were this age. Because if they are that bent on making the child or expecting a child to still do what they say, still be controlled, they probably were not very controllable themselves for their own parents. That would just be my guess. I could be wrong. I'm just shooting out ideas here.
You're not wrong.
But
you're not wrong.
But yeah, that doesn't equal respect to me.
No, respect does not correlate with being submissive.
No.
At that age, especially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Situational. What else?
What
would you recommend we've got some, I think, some really good steps to begin that reconciliation process, you know, which we'll get to in a little bit, but you have to want the reconciliation first before you can even talk about how do you get there. But from some of these estrangements.
Well, I think that as a parent, you have to stop and think, every person that marries into your family, like, you have to look at them as they're a part of my family. And again, if this is just a flat preference issue, I think parents need to get over themselves, because they are not making the choices for their children. If there's not abuse involved, there's not any like psychopathic tendencies, you know, then get over yourself, really and truly, because it's not your choice. And you are abdicating a very, very special role and ability to allow your family to pull in another person. And like, I don't know, like what, you never stay the same. Like, I am not the same that I would have been had I not married into your family. There's just different things. It changes you. The question is, how much do you want to not even affect change, but how much do you want to influence someone that your child marries? You can't have a level of influence if you don't have proximity, if you don't have relationship.
Yeah.
You know,
and we've talked about that a fair amount.
Yeah.
Without relationship, you have limited influence.
Yeah. But then I want to be influenced too. I learn things all the time from my kids, you know, like my daughters-in-law teach me things all the time. So there's a reciprocal, you know, give and take there, you know.
Yeah.
You just miss out on that if you just dig your heels in and you refuse because you think you're right. You know, I think you can be right or you can have relationship, and you got to choose.
That sounds like a marriage advice too.
Yeah.
I can be right or I can be happy.
Well, yeah, that's a whole other episode, but you know. So yeah, how do you deal with even physical estrangement? Because physical estrangement, I think, is one of the things that shows up when kids go off to college.
Yeah.
You know, you go from having a kid in your house and you have access to them, and they move off maybe to college, and you drop them off and they're a state or 2 or 3 away, and you come home and you no longer have that same access. So it may not be estrangement as in we have no relationship, but physically everything changes because they're physically 3 states away from you and your only access is through, you know, a phone.
But think about the access that we have now versus
technological.
Yeah.
Yes.
20 years ago.
Oh yeah.
We have FaceTime or any
if they
number
will
of
answer
Zooms, and
yeah,
your ability to connect has never been greater. But that does, to your point, it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy to do.
Yeah.
But the physical estrangement is usually just that. It's a geographical separation. There's still contact. When I look at that one from a physical estrangement, I don't get a sense that there's an actual estrangement in the relationship. It's just loss of access.
So it's probably one of the, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably a 1 or 2 on the wheel of like, what's the easiest to deal with?
Yeah,
I would say maybe a physical.
That's relative, right?
It is relative, but
we look at some families that their entire life revolved around the child.
Mm-hmm.
When the child's gone, they wouldn't call it a 1, right? So it's real easy for us to be able to say, yeah, it's probably, as far as reconciliation on it, there's not a lot of reconciliation required on that because the relationship's fine, seems to be. It's just a physical separation.
Yeah.
Maybe time zones are different. They get out, they're working, they're being a productive member to society. They don't have the ability to answer every text or phone call that comes in.
Or they're in class.
Or possibly a class. So the physical estrangement, I think that is the message that you gave just a second ago, is parents need to understand they don't have complete unvetted access anymore.
Yeah.
It's just a change in physical location.
Right.
So to your point, I agree. It's probably one of the easier ones to address.
Maybe less complicated.
Less complicated.
Would be a better
The
term.
old adage, though, it doesn't matter until it matters to me, would play. So I would agree that that's probably one of the easier ones to address. Emotional estrangement.
Yeah. That's probably a little more tricky.
Okay.
You know?
Why so?
I think because it's not just a parent isn't attached to a child just physically, but there is an emotional attachment. Probably, I don't know. And I get myself in trouble because I say things and then I realize some people take them literally, but probably more on the part of a parent than a child, you know, especially when you've got a college age kid that's launching out into their own, or, you know, getting married or whatever. But an emotional estrangement to me feels worse because a kid can live states or hours away, and you still be emotionally connected, or minutes, but you still be connected to them emotionally. But if that emotional connection is gone, then it's like, then everything's just superficial. Everything's just robotic and plastic. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever been through something like that before?
With our kids? Mm-hmm. I think with Logan, we were emotionally estranged from him for a while because he didn't feel safe. For us, it was, we've talked about this on a previous podcast when he came out and told us he was bisexual. Like that was we handled things so different because we just didn't know. Like we literally did not know. What are you saying? What does this mean? This is not what we didn't see this coming, And so just in the trying to respect where he's coming from and vice versa, he's trying to be respectful with us. You say things and do things that might injure the person. And we would never do that intentionally. But sometimes you just there were periods of time where I could feel him pull away, even though he lived under, well, at the time he didn't. He ended up moving back in with us, and there was still some emotional estrangement happening, but he felt like he had to protect himself by not being as emotionally available. Like we weren't safe at times for him to just bare his soul to.
Yeah.
And vice versa. We had to pull away. We had to deal with some things. And so, but here's another thing, not barring that, just real fast. I know you're getting ready to say something. When your kids get married, like when Taylor got married, there was a little bit like you're not as emotionally attached to that son of yours when he gets married. And you shouldn't be, because he's emotionally attached to his wife. So there's some normal transitions, emotional transitions that take place that I, as a mom, I better expect, because if it doesn't happen, then I think that's dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And
what we're talking about right now, I believe it wholeheartedly. It's an important topic. And there's really, for me, there's two main audiences. What we're going to end with are steps of empty nesters. How do you reconcile some of these relationships?
Yeah.
But I would love it more than anything else if the people that have children still at home could listen to something like this, because if they are aware of the upcoming changes, they can better be prepared to deal with what you just described.
Yeah.
So there's like two different audiences: those that are an empty nest and feel estranged, and those that still have children at home. What can we do to help equip them so that they don't feel that level of estrangement? Because most of it is going to be from a perspective of the parent. I feel estranged. And when Jake asked the question of, did we ever feel like an emotional estrangement? My first thought was Taylor, because I met with him every Saturday morning at Starbucks. We did that when he started turning 18, or turned 18. All the way up to when he got married.
Yeah.
Out of the 52 Sundays a year, I bet we hit 45 of them on a Saturday morning. And I got to visit with, invest, ask questions, coach him. And then all of a sudden he didn't need it. He did, but he didn't feel like he did. And I missed that.
Yeah.
It was, part of it was, unbeknownst to me, I got, I don't know if addicted is the right word, addicted to being needed and adding value. And all of a sudden, he didn't need it. I don't need you, Dad.
Yeah.
And, that was painful, but it was one of those things that I also knew that this is what we had created. We designed our family around equipping them that they would not ever be codependent on us.
Sure.
So I wanted to add value, but it was one of those things that I had to just begin to step back and to recognize he is doing what he was designed to do.
And isn't it interesting as a parent, whether it's your first child or your sixth, it doesn't matter. You're still going through the changes with them. as a parent, I better be growing and changing just as my child is growing and changing, because if I stop growing, changing, stretching allowing myself to be stretched, I'll put it that way, then that's the place that I think is dangerous for a parent. When you dig your heels in and you decide, nope, this is how it's going to be. And if it's not going to be this way, then I'm just going to wait. And I think parents wait for children to return, and maybe they don't, because you're not growing with them. Like you had growing pains with Taylor, just like he was probably having growing pains, like moving out and just the some of the fears of being on his own. And I've got a wife to support now. And, those were there.
Yep.
So yeah.
Third one, selective contact. Mm-hmm. That is the one where basically the child is deciding in advance when we will have any type of contact. I think you see it a lot around holidays, birthdays, maybe Mother's Day. I get the feeling that one, probably as much as any of them on the list, is driven by a guilt perspective from the parent. We haven't seen you in a while. The least you can do is come home for Christmas, or your mother really misses you. It's Mother's Day. You need to come see her. I can see a lot of that showing up, and it's like the child may show up out of almost a false obligation, and they're guarded, and in their perspective, it's like, well, I'm here, almost like celebrate the fact that I'm here because I'm gone for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
you didn't silence your phone, did you?
No.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. Because I think it could be a guilt thing. It could be something like that. It could also be, I think sometimes kids, when they leave the house and they get on their own, they've maybe been controlled or felt like they didn't have any control, and now they want to control things. Mm-hmm. So it's a way for them to control their lives. Yeah. And I think that, sometimes kids want to draw boundaries, and those are the boundaries that they draw, whether you like it or not. But yeah, I think all of it can be painful unless you recognize it's a normal part of the process that kids go through in leaving the nest and becoming independent, because I feel like our kids are 36, 33, 31 now. So they've been out of the nest a long time, and we see and talk to our kids a fair amount, but we had years that we didn't when they were kind of earlier in the process of launching and being independent. And so I think if you do things right as a parent, and right for me may not be what's right for you, so don't hear that. Yeah. But if you handle things in a healthy way, your kids sometimes will come back to roost at times. Maybe not to live in your house roost, but in a part of your life.
Yeah, I think part of that is probably age appropriate, maybe not appropriate, appropriate or acceptable, because I was telling the group of business owners at this meeting last week, from the ages probably when they were 16 to 22, somehow I'd lost most of my brain cells.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I just wasn't that smart anymore.
I was probably more than 22. It was probably 25-ish.
But somewhere around 25, I started gathering them back.
Yeah, and you were so smart all of a sudden.
And then I was able to add value again. Yeah. And that season, even though it was 16, that's still pretty young, but they feel like they have all the answers. You even got somebody right now that was asking a question about, I've got teenage kids and they think they know how to parent, and I'm just thinking that from 16, okay, we'll say to 25.
Yeah.
Wasn't the greatest or strongest relationship. Now we had relationship, but yeah, I didn't know much.
Yeah.
And a strong personality could definitely become overbearing, and that overbearing personality, all that does is push them further away.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've talked about a lot is when the boys were younger. How can we create a home or a culture that not only our boys want to be there, but they want to bring their friends too? What can I do as a parent to create a culture that they actually want to come home at Christmas, or they want to grab me for coffee, or they want to invite me to go play golf? What can I do? Now, if I'm constantly coaching, correcting, chastising, even though they're adults, what's the likelihood that I'm going to get invited to coffee
or as a mom, if I'm constantly laying the guilt on them and I'm like, I never see you, and oh, I wish I saw you more, and
which is true,
they're not
that's coming from a heart posture.
Yeah, but it's
how you come across.
It's how we come across, yeah. And they're not gonna. Who wants to do that? And it's not. I'm not saying you have to. It's the wrong place to focus all those feelings. That's why I think therapy is important. That's why I think having friends, like close friends that you can, if you got to get these feelings out and the sadness and you've got to emote all of those things, do it somewhere other than to your child, because it's going to repel. I feel like it's going to repel them more than draw them.
Use the T word. You were going to talk about
therapy.
That earlier. We talked about some of the things that we've read. So I think this is a good time.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I am seeing more and more things about the increase of use of therapy has almost caused more estrangement in families.
Bigger gap, a bigger separation.
Yes.
I'm seeing the same thing. So I don't know, again, if it's algorithm related or if it is leading to estrangement, because estrangement is a big deal. What have you learned from listening to some of those things that could cause that, do you think? Or what have you heard?
Well, something that I think is a really powerful phrase that I saw in something the other day is that this isn't just a phase, it's a signal. So what is the signal of that telling us? I think there's different things. I think you have to be wise. I don't think therapy is bad. I don't think you should throw the baby out with the bathwater and deem all therapy is bad. But I think you have to be choosy about who you are seeking therapy
counsel from.
Yeah. And I think if you are not in alignment in some things, then that's just a recipe for disaster. So I think the signal is what's happening then in the world of therapy. Our memories are things that our children are remembering from, and I use this not to quotes. Just because I think sometimes there has been like different documentations of children remembering things that are not necessarily there. They're being guided, or manufactured, because it keeps a client on the hook for longer. And that's not, again, these are probably isolated cases, but
I think it's contributing to the trend that we're seeing, because there's a definite trend of the estrangement deal. We're seeing it not only in social media and different things, we're seeing it in our own comments that there's a lot of hurt, a lot of frustration.
There's way more parents that are estranged from kids. And not just like, maybe it is just a little estrangement, but I mean, talking like I don't have contact at all. Like I'm waiting still. Like this one woman, like, I don't know what I've done.
Yeah.
Let's
hit one more.
Okay.
And then let's get into what possible steps that we can give people. Okay. Again, these are just ideas. There's no magic pill, right? They're just some thoughts, but what one more do you want to touch on?
You decide. You're in charge, big boy.
Let's talk about role reversal.
Okay. All right.
We had a couple on not too long ago that great couple, the Calverts, and they are literally in the position that they are the caregivers for theirs. So I'm not really talking about that.
I was going to say that doesn't fit here.
No, it's not. It's not what I'm talking about. They are having to basically take care of and parent, but it's because of a physical necessity and age. What I think this is really talking about is you've got maybe some 20-something young people that really do have their head screwed on straight, and they are feeling a responsibility to provide either emotional support, financial support, or both to their parents. And their parents aren't aged. They're not in their 60s, 70s, 80s years old. I can think of several in my circle right now that, you know, they are really parenting their adult parents.
You're talking adult parents, like parents that are emotionally stunted, emotionally immature, emotionally
and financially unable to provide for themselves. So now these 30-somethings, the ones that I know, they're 30-somethings that they're taking care of parents. They're not only coaching them, but they are the emotional support animal. They're the support person. They help them make decisions because they have not been making great decisions. Could be addict related, drugs or alcohol. And that puts a tremendous amount of strain on the family unit that are in their 30s. They've got children at home.
Yeah.
They're raising their kids. They're making wise decisions, but they have the added stress and responsibility of the generation up.
Or they don't. I think there's where the estrangement comes in, because if I'm going to put myself in the place of one of these 20-something-year-olds who has children,
okay,
and maybe has a parent that is requiring more of me than what I can give. If I've got to triage, you know, my priorities, I'm going to have to draw a boundary with my parent.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Mainly, it's great advice for these young adults, because I can see something happening that if they don't draw those lines, they end up giving so much of themselves to so many different people that they become either unhealthy emotionally or physically.
Yeah.
So drawing those boundaries is the healthiest thing that you could do for your own family.
Right.
But what happens now if guilt becomes part of the playing card that the parents are using? Or,
well, maybe you have to draw even a deeper boundary and cut ties for a while, because I think this is what, and I know there are always extenuating circumstances, but as a parent, if I don't deal with my stuff, my kids are going to have to deal with it. I think in a way, this is going to sound really harsh, but that's one of the most selfish things I can do as a parent.
What?
One of the most selfish things I can do is refuse to deal with my crap and stay stuck in an emotionally completely immature cycle. Maybe stay stuck in not being self-aware at all. Like if my children come to me and tell me, Mom, you got to take a look at this. This is what I see. This is what I'm sensing. And this is the burden it's placing on me. Well, I can choose to be completely defensive, you know, and hang on to, you know, guard whatever that is that I'm trying to guard at the expense of my relationship with my kids.
Yeah.
Or I can truly listen. I think you have to really listen with your heart sometimes, you know, and I'm not saying it's not painful. You know, I don't ever want my kids to have to say stuff like that to me. But there've been many times that my kids have had to correct me on some things that I've done or said, or, you know, had to help me shift the way I looked at something, you know. I can always tell, especially from our oldest, if I get a text that's like, you know, can we have like maybe a tough conversation, you know?
Yep.
And I want that. I do want that. I want that open communication, but it's hard as a parent because it hits kind of at your pride, you know? I don't know.
So you've bled into some of these healing steps. So we'll just go ahead and go on into that. I have 5 on the list. We could probably come up with another 5. Pardon?
Give them to me.
So I'll give them to you 5, and then let's go back and actually talk about some of them. You okay with that?
Yeah.
Number 1, reflect deeply. Number 2, own your stuff. You would say own your crap, but that's fine.
That's better than the alternative.
Well, yeah. Number 3, apologize well.
Yeah.
4, create safe space. And then number 5, do your own healing. So when we talk about reflect deeply, I love the question that I came across on this. It is a very powerful question, and you better be prepared to listen and shut up. Like that moment of silence right there, right? Yeah. Ask this question of your adult children. What was it like to be parented by me?
Ooh, yeah.
We may not like that answer.
Yeah.
And the thing that we have to understand is if we legitimately care to hear the answer, we will just listen, because even if we feel that their answer is wrong, that is completely irrelevant. They're giving you their perspective of what it was like to be parented by you.
Well, and here's the deal. If there's an emotional estrangement, you're probably not going to get an answer. You're going to get fluff. You're going to get surface, because if the child has learned, you can't handle my truth, they're just not going to give it to you.
So as a parent that is going to ask that question, my advice would then be, if you feel that it is a surface answer, you have not created a safe space, which was number 4.
Yeah.
But we can ask the question, what was it like to be parented by you? Man, it was great. Okay, listen, let's be honest. I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl. I can take it. I want to know from your perspective, what was it like to be parented by you? And to create the safe space, we can talk about it briefly now. We'll dig in more. No matter what you say, I will not have an opinion. Mm-hmm. Would that change things? Would they maybe open up at that point?
Maybe. It depends on how deep that emotional rift is, you know?
Really what that question, reflect deeply, is, which we skipped some of these other things, that's the mirror moment you talked about at one point.
Yeah.
That is, what part have I had to play? What happens when I look in the mirror? Because more often than not, when there is an issue between even you and I can do one of two things. I can blame you, or I can look in the mirror. 9 times out of 10, I would say I will get far more accomplished when I look in the mirror.
But it takes some big guts to look in the mirror. You know?
It has, yes, you have to have such a strong will for the desired outcome of, in this case, reconciliation. Because again, if my target, my goal is reconciliation, I don't care who's right. I just want things rectified, right?
Right.
Own your stuff.
Without defending. Just own it.
My phrase for that was always, I'm going to fall on the sword.
Yeah.
Used to say I've fallen on the sword so many times and wonder I hadn't bled to death. Unfortunately, what I find in the business world is business folks, business owners, entrepreneurs, they are quick to fall on the sword when it comes to dealing with a client or a customer.
Yeah.
They're not so quick to fall on this. Why do we spend so much more time, energy, and effort to solidify our businesses, to create a culture of that type of behavior? And then I come home and I'm not willing to invest even more into my family. So own your stuff without being defensive.
Yeah.
Because this is the follow-up to that number 1. What was it like to be parented by me and not be defensive? Mm-hmm. Because if they are right, you have no defense. If they were wrong on it, you don't need to defend.
Yeah.
Right. Number 3, apologize well. Sincere.
It doesn't mean saying, well, I'm sorry that you felt like I was, too controlling as a parent, because that's not an apology. That's a defensive. I'm still going to defend my right to be controlling, and it's insinuating that their feeling it's insinuating that their feeling that way isn't true. So I think wording, the phrases that you use, has to be finessed in a sincere apology, and not finessed as in, I don't really mean it, but finessed as in how I'm presenting this to you has to feel, and you need to receive it as real. And if it is a real apology, then you're going to express it in such a way, I think, because if I'm truly sorry, I'm going to be heartbroken about something, especially if I've caused my kids to anguish over something. Like, as a parent, like, that's the worst thing in the world, the worst feeling in the world. Like, I love my kids. I don't ever want to do anything to hurt them.
The only thing we didn't talk about on apologizing well is that there's no strings attached.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if there are strings attached, I'm still shifting blame to someone other than me.
So what would be an example of strings attached?
I'm sorry that I responded that way. If you won't talk to me that way again, I won't act that way.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm putting the responsibility of, you're the reason I acted that way.
Yeah.
Strings attached.
Yeah.
Number 4, create safe space. We talked about it briefly. Creating a safe space it's first of all, you have to identify, what does that maybe look like?
Yeah.
Creating a safe space is no blame, safe space to talk, to vet your feelings, to not be defensive. Creating a safe space is a welcoming environment.
I also want to say this. Yes, I think being a safe space could be safe for a parent, but maybe not a child. I think it depends. And I think it could be maybe safe for a child, but not a parent. I think a safe space means, I don't think that there need to be strings attached. It's kind of like, again, bleed over into apologizing well. But I do think that there's an element of, if we want to have a productive conversation, then there have to be some ground rules. Like, my child can't be screaming and yelling at me and expect that we're going to get anywhere. We have to be calm. We need to be able to control our tempers. That doesn't mean that you can't get a little heated, but I think, I feel like respect has to go both ways.
And that's again, the definition of respect, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
This last one is unique because it is really introspective. It's do your own healing. That could be therapy. And we talked about the risks of, make sure you've got the right one. Do your own healing could be working with a coach to help you put a new perspective on something. It could be podcasts like this that give, real life examples and scenarios. There's a lot of inner work when it comes to do your own healing. And one of the things you briefly touched on it, I want to elaborate on it, or that you said earlier. If we, as the patriarchs, as parents, if we don't address our own crap, we leave it to our kids to deal with it at some point in the future. So what we don't address and fix in our lives, there's a very high likelihood that somehow it will get transferred to the next generation. And if we don't deal with it, they'll get to.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of studies we even talk about it in the Legacy Navigator book. I will do things to help the next generation not deal with it more than I want to deal with my own crap. But at least that process can get started when I understand that what I don't deal with, they will. Mm-hmm. That is unacceptable to me.
Well, it's interesting because what people don't know behind the scenes is just even this last week, some things we've gone through, and watching a few sessions with some of the things that Taylor's done. and dealing with like even inner child stuff, like going back, like the Lord taking us back to the first time that we ever really felt afraid, you know, things like that. Like, I feel like we have good relationships with our kids, but we're still working out the ins and outs of letting go of things. Like, there was a situation even in my family that we were talking about with some family members that, you know, brought up something with me, like, because of like in my past, I had a grandma that was very, very, once my little sister came along, I was literally chopped liver. And I learned very, very at a young age, if I needed something, I had to like use my sister as a proxy, you know, and ask her to ask for it. Well, as a little girl, that created some things that I've had to deal with in my adult life, you know. It hasn't just wrecked me and left me in the fetal position, but I notice areas of my life that it's stopped me in some things, and I have to deal with it and remind myself that I'm safe, you know. I know that sounds woo woo, but there are parts of us as parents that our younger selves need healing and need a little bit of care. So I feel like we're almost 60. Like, you never get to the point where you're not working out something internally.
It's true. You know, in the Legacy Navigator book, we talk a lot about the types of legacies, and there's really only two: the default version and the intentional version. So what that says is we will all leave a legacy, period. None of us will leave this earth without having some type of a legacy. And when I was thinking about some of the things that we've gone through on this and dealing with estrangement, dealing with estrangement is really about repairing relationships. And so I was thinking about legacy from that perspective. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind. Legacy is really about what you repair before you're gone.
Yeah.
And that has really stood out to me this whole week.
Yeah.
What do I need to repair? We are not guaranteed the next 50 years. What can I fix now?
Yeah.
What can we address now? What needs to be repaired so that we can have the most amazing relationships with our adult children? And the last thing I'll say about the healing, I said there's no magic pill, but it's also not instantaneous. Mm-mm. It is not try it once and be done.
Yeah.
There will be many times I feel that as parents that are looking to reconcile a relationship, do not try it one time and think, oh, it wasn't received well, work. And I'm not done. Right. It is an ongoing intentional process. Yeah. And if there's true estrangement, I can almost promise you the first few times you reach out, it will not be reciprocated because they don't feel safe. But if we will stay at it, we will be consistent. We will love without expecting anything in return. That we have a heart to grow people and grow that relationship, and we make a determination to not be defensive, we will outlast them.
Yeah.
And we can rebuild those relationships, but it will take time, consistency, and intentionality.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
That was my mic
reader's drop.
Yeah. So, anything else?
No, I think that was good. That was heavy, but it was good.
There was a lot of information.
Yeah.
So, comment, respond, let us know what you would like to talk about in future episodes. If you want any additional information, just reach out. We'll get back to you.
Yep. Welch out.